Welcome to the Science Salon podcast. I'm your host, Michael Shermer. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to tell you about our sponsor, the Great Courses Plus app. Comes on your phone. It looks like that. You just touch that one right there. And it opens up and you have a whole host of courses and lectures you can listen to. Hundreds of courses, thousands of lectures. You don't have to buy just one course anymore. You get all the courses for a monthly fee. When you sign up through my site, you get a free trial, and then it's just $10 a month for the first quarter, I think. And then it's an incredible product because instead of like grinding through a whole book or whole course, if you decide you don't like a lecture, it's boring, you skip to the next lecture, or you skip courses. So I was in the middle of listening to this George Orwell course. It's fantastic. About how all the trouble he had getting Animal Farm published. I had no idea. Anyway, but then I see, this pops up, coronavirus outbreak, what you need to know. Boom, I'm going to that one. I'm going to listen to that lecture on the way home today because, well, that's what everybody's talking about now. Okay, so for the deal, you get a free trial plus $10 a month. After that, you go to greatcoursesplus.com/salon. That's www.thegreatcoursesplus.com/salon. My author this week is none other than Anne Dreen, author of Cosmos, Possible Worlds, the sequel to Carl Sagan's beloved classic. You all know her, of course, as also the creative director of NASA's Voyager Interstellar Message Project and program director of the first solar sail deep space mission launched on a Russian ICBM in 2005. With her late husband, Carl Sagan, she co-wrote the original 1980s Emmy Award and Peabody Award-winning TV series Cosmos, A Personal Voyage, and 6 New York Times bestsellers. She was the lead executive producer, director, and co-writer of Cosmos, A Space-Time Odyssey, for which she won Peabody Producers Guild and Emmy Awards in 2014. Druyan is the executive producer, writer, director, and creator of Cosmos, Possible Worlds, first broadcast in 2020, which I just binge-watched and then listened to the audio version of Cosmos, which Anne reads 3 of the chapters. And the script for the show, the words that Neil is saying on the screen, those are mostly Anne's words, but also, of course, a team of writers and making contributions there. We cover all the great subjects: science and religion, God, the environment, free will and determinism, the hard problem of consciousness. Anne has thought about all of these things in her collaborations with Carl Sagan over the 20 years they were together before he died in 1996. They really, sort of delved into all of these big issues, really from a non-believer's perspective, although Carl was, never big on saying he's an atheist. He wasn't militant about all this. And so we even get into that. What's the right strategy for non-believers, atheists, skeptics, humanists, whatever. And then, of course, we get into what it's like to write a script for a television show, how you produce such a show, and the sort of pragmatic aspects of that. Anyway, really one of the most interesting conversations I've had in the history of this show. So with that, please welcome Anne Dreen. Well, let's talk about Cosmos. I think, by the way, you're the publisher, National Geographic, of your book. This is so beautiful. This is one of the most beautiful books I've ever seen.
Oh, you make me so happy.
And it's only $30, which is what most books cost. And this thing is loaded with 4-color illustrations and photographs, and pretty much every page has something on it. And I'm always appreciative of physical books. I'm old school, and the thickness of the paper, and it has enough density to hold the fine, high resolution photographs and all that. So I just want to comment on that. Now, to what extent, since most people have seen the series on National Geographic, is this a script such that when we're listening to Neil, they're actually your words?
Okay, great. Okay, so talk about a beautiful question. Thank you for asking that question. There is not a single word in the last 2 seasons of Cosmos that's ad-libbed. It is very precisely scripted, and no word ever changes. Now, these words come not just from me, but also from Brannon Braga, my co-writer, and to a lesser extent, Andre Bormanis and Sam Sagan. And so I can't take credit for all the words, but yes, Cosmos is completely scripted. And in fact, the first season of Cosmos that Carl and Steve Soder and I wrote together, there was only one ad lib in the whole season. And that was famously when Carl was cutting the apple pie.
Mm.
And he was having some difficulty cutting the pie. And he said, crumbly, but good. And that was the only time that there's ever been an ad lib in Cosmos.
That's really funny. Yeah. I think a lot of people don't probably know that because Neil is so good at ad libbing on his radio shows and TV shows and so on.
And so great at delivering, at performing, at, delivering our scripts so brilliantly.
He is really good. I know a lot of scientists that are irritated by his fame or jealous probably. And in a way that they think, well, anybody could do that. What Carl did or what Bill Nye does or what Neil does. And it's like, I do quite a bit of that myself. And
I was going to say, or by what you do.
Well, but I can tell I'm not as good as, say, Neil or Bill. Or Bill is really funny, spontaneously funny. Neil just exudes emotion and gravitas so well. But people think, well, he just can just do that. No, that takes practice, and that's a learned skill. And also, I'm sure, by temperament, he's genetically predisposed to be really good at that by his personality and so on. Most people can't do that, and I think that was one of the early messages of Carl is that we all need to learn to do that better. We scientists to communicate that.
Absolutely. In fact, of course, Carl was punished for that.
Right.
But the thing is that I just don't understand that mentality. I know it's not a problem. It's not a scientific problem. It's a human problem. Mm-hmm. There's some primate issue going on there that makes us feel diminished when other people do things really well. But, I think in the last 20 years, 10 years, I feel like the environment has changed for the better.
Yeah.
And I feel that, for instance, NASA as an institution has gone from, in the early days, I remember, all of them saying to us, what do we need a record for? Why put a record on a spacecraft? Or why take the pale blue dot picture? And yet, in the last 10 years, I've seen NASA really develop its talent for communicating the wonders that it is responsible for bringing to us.
I should remind our listeners that the record you're referring to are the Voyager records that you were the director of organizing what content would be put on them and trying to find a quick picture of that. Here they are. The Voyager records, yeah. So, I mean, they're not really for aliens because people, what are the chances they're going to find them? They were for us, right?
They were completely for us. And of course, it's not a zero chance that they will ever be intercepted and actually played. It's not zero. You've got two spacecraft.
Yeah.
And with the shelf lives of 5 billion years, the whole past history of the Earth, that's a really, so the odds go up over the billions of years. But I agree with you. It's pretty unlikely. No, we were trying to send a message to ourselves, really. And I think when we communicate, most often that's what we're doing.
I think so much of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, the scientific SETI program, but as well also some of the ufology narrative stories, they're really about us. Even just thinking about, how would we communicate with an ET? How would we find their signals or whatever? It's really thinking about who we are. That's why I love the story of the bee communication with Frisch in your book. This idea of communicating with extraterrestrials, we can't even communicate with terrestrials of other species.
I think about that every day, especially living in a rural place and being surrounded by nature and sitting on my porch and just watching every caterpillar and ant And, and of course, the way that we have come to understand that these other ways of being alive may also include other kinds of consciousness is really all of it leads back to Darwin. Mm-hmm. Without that understanding of our relatedness, of the fact that we have a common ancestor, and that there are many pathways actually to politics and to emotions, is is really just another one of the countless legacies that we have from that great idea.
Yeah, you hit the big guys in there, Darwin and Einstein, but I also love how you pull out people that most of us never even heard of. I'd heard of Vavilov, but I didn't know anything about his personal life and his career and his collision with Stalin and Lysenko. So, but instead of telling us that story, how do you write a script like that? Like, okay, I'm going to tell the story of Vavilov. I got an hour to fill. What do I do?
Well, okay, so I've been thinking about this for 22 years before I actually got to do it. And it was because I found a book in our library that it was one of the few books that Carl and I had never discussed. And I saw his handwriting in the margins, very thin book, decided to read it, and fell in love with Vavilov and wanted to tell the story. So I've been thinking about it for, as I say, decades, because it is an ideal example of not only the collision between science and state and science and authority, but also it's also about how far is a single human being willing to go to stand up for what is true and what is real, or for science, or for the scientific method of finding out what's real. And so, having been in love with Vavilov for all this time, I've given it a tremendous amount of thought. And when I sat down with Brannon in our writer's room, we began to imagine it. And then Jason Clark, one of our other executive producers, said, have you seen Anomalisa? And I had, and I loved it with, just a tremendously effective movie made with stop action animation. And so we went right to the people who had created Anomalisa. And that gave us, a completely different easel on which to tell the story. And then to get the great Viggo Mortensen to be the voice of Vavilov. I just felt every time I had the honor of directing Viggo, and I just felt every time he spoke one of those lines, he was in this amazing way managing to embody the wounded belief in what is possible in society that this man carried within him, and that valor, that willingness to say, you can set me on fire, but you can't make me lie about science. Would that more of us had that character and commitment, we would be in a much better situation.
Yeah. I didn't realize Viggo was the voice of Vavilov. That's great. But you also start off there with the problem to be solved. That is, how do we fight hunger, which is the natural state of things? Because of the second law of thermodynamics and entropy, if you do nothing, you get poverty, you get hunger, starvation, and so on. You actually have to do something. So you start off with the agricultural revolution and end up in the 20th century with this collision of Vavilov and Lysenko and the difference between openness of science and so on. So that's quite a narrative arc that you put together there.
Thank you. Well, if it's going to be in Cosmos, it has to be what I call a 3-fer or a 4-fer. It has to not only be a way into the ideas. You want to convey the ideas, but you don't want it to be painful or tedious. So you want to find the story of that life that completely brings the ideas to have a life of their own. And that way, ultimately, the audience leaves and they have ownership of the idea. because they remember the person. We're a story-driven species. That's
right.
That's how it works. And to find the story is always the key to every sequence in Cosmos.
Yeah, the animation I like very much. I know Jason Clark and Brandon Braga pretty well. And Jason calls that what you guys did in the first Cosmos back in the 80s was the mutton chops effect, where you get some actor and you put some mutton chops on him and a hat and some 200-year-old jacket, and there's our. So I like how you got away from that and went to the animation. And I have to say, parenthetically, the animation of the new Cosmos is even more spectacular than the previous season, which itself was spectacular. So I guess that industry has just improved that much.
Well, we're working with exactly the same people. And I think we've developed an idiom together. And also, I just feel, because Cosmos really is meaningful, it may be a doorway for somebody who doesn't even understand that they have any interest in science or, any kind of talent for it. And so, because everyone feels so inspired, how many hours of this kind of television or this kind of streaming are there?
Yeah.
So this is a great opportunity. And so I think that everybody comes to Cosmos with their best possible game, with they just want to go higher.
Yeah. Yeah. There's certainly a lot more quality content now than there was, say, in 1980. I mean, you guys were the only game in town. So that's encouraging, although there's a lot of junk that comes along with it. I think of the Ancient Aliens series that's just endless on the so-called History Channel. It's so bad, and they never have any skeptics on there at all. And it's like,
it's a sin. It's really a sin, because what you're doing is you have this natural human population with a hunger to know history, to know something about science, to know answers to the most fascinating questions there are. And to me, it's sinful to constantly crank out this counterfeit stuff in which people go away. It's worse than nothing, because they go away thinking they know something that never happened.
I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. I mean, you take an example like Göbekli Tepe, which was, by the way, on your in the last episode of the New York World Fair 2039 on the building of all the ancient civilizations. I noticed that you guys put Göbekli Tepe on there. I'm fascinated by that ever since I met Graham Hancock, who's not an ancient alien alternative archaeologist. He thinks there was a super advanced intelligent terrestrial civilization maybe 20, 30,000 years ago that might have built that. But that aside, the real story is not aliens or advanced civilizations. It's that hunter-gatherers were able to do things that we never imagined they could have done. I mean, these are spectacular structures that, are 11, 12,000 years old, long before humans were supposed to be able to do that in small communities. You allegedly had to have agriculture to have these gigantic civilizational populations to build monumental architecture like the pyramids or Stonehenge or whatever. But Göbekli Tepe seems to throw that in reverse. And you touch on that a little bit with, if I can say this right, Çatalhöyük. Yeah, okay, Çatalhöyük.
Yeah. I was thinking of Çatalhöyük. That's in our first episode. And that was a major contribution of Sam Sagan's, if I may give him a shout out. And, this is the thing. I don't know about, now you have to help me with the other one.
Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, which is the same part of the world.
Yeah.
But I had never thought that it was supposed to be 30 or 40,000 years old.
Well, that's kind of the extreme version.
I don't think that's right.
No.
I think that's an exaggeration. But the fact is that the pyramids, the Tower of Jericho, which we feature in the first episode, the Tower of Jericho fascinates me the most because it was 5,000 years old before the first pyramid was built. And so now you're going back really to just a few thousand years after the invention of agriculture. And I may be misremembering this, but it took, I think, something like 11,000 man hours to build. It still stands.
Yeah.
There is nothing supernatural about it. But what's amazing to me is that here are these sort of intermediate generations of people who have begun settled agriculture, but they're not city dwellers yet. They're not really, they haven't invented the street in various parts of the city, but they built something that still stands. Still, you can still climb those steps. The surface of the earth has changed so much in the intervening 9,000, however many years, that it's below the surface of the earth. And yet, the thing that I hate so much about the alien, giving the aliens or the extraterrestrials credit for doing things that our ancestors did.
Yeah.
Is that it robs us of the self-confidence that we need to get through this time, at a time when human self-esteem is so terribly low. And so it's not just an idea that has been debunked countless times in countless ways, but it's also a kind of a theft from our ancestors for the credit that they deserve.
Yeah, I think of it as the bigotry of low expectations that, they simply were too dumb or too primitive.
Dumb, right?
We really undersell our ancestors. Well, just at the beginning of your book, you open with the World's Fair in 1939 and Carl's connection to that with Einstein's opening quote, which is such a great story. They lit up the light bulbs with cosmic rays coming in to flick a switch, and it burned out some of the light bulbs or whatever. But so Einstein gets up and says, if science, like art, is to perform its mission truly and fully, its achievements must enter not only superficially, but with their inner meaning into the consciousness of the people. I see that as something of an epigram of the cosmos and the life work of you and Carl.
Absolutely. This is certainly, that's what I felt when I was surfing around on YouTube one night and I found this clip. And, of course, we all know so many great things that Einstein said, but I had never encountered that quote.
I'd never seen that.
And I felt like it was, this was how beautifully he expressed what has been the dream of cosmos from day one. The idea that this is a birthright, science is a birthright, reason is a birthright. We should not only share it with everyone on Earth, but our security depends on everyone on Earth coming to understand this.
Yeah. Well, it's an opportune time to remember that this week in the middle of this pandemic. You also have a couple of pages later, you write, science, like love, is a means to that transcendence, to that soaring experience of the oneness of being fully alive. The scientific approach to nature and my understanding of love are the same. Love asks us to get beyond the infantile projections of our personal hopes and fears to embrace the other's reality. This kind of unflinching love never stops daring to go deeper, to reach higher. I also think of this book in particular, kind of a love story or poem to Carl, and you have this picture of you and Carl that I want to show. It's such a classic. I've seen that elsewhere, maybe in one of his biographies. And so in a way, you're kind of paying tribute to your life partner and the love of your life. And you do get a little personal in some of the chapters about that. You mentioned how devastated you were when he died, to the point of feeling suicidal. But
absolutely. Please go ahead.
Well, and then but then you had to pull back and go, well, I have children, so have to get back to life. Life is for the living. What else am I going to do but besides push on? So and you have that on the record is your heartbeat of you being in love with Carl. It's such a great story. I mean, how many of us get to have our love stories projected trillions of miles into the cosmos forever?
I still can't wrap my brain around it. I've led a charmed life, and I've been so tremendously fortunate. And it is Michael, you touch on something which is true about the book. It is completely a labor of love. I wrote it at 4:00 in the morning before I would go to set, and I'd have to be on set sometimes 6, 7 in the morning. And so I was, on location in Santa Fe for months at a time, because we were shooting on those big sound stages there. And so it had a kind of, I just couldn't even actually believe that I would get it done because it just seemed like such a tremendous challenge. And yet, I do feel like it's my way of like when someone dies and you love them with all your heart, can you do after that when they're no longer able to perceive anything that you do? And when your most principal joy for the 20 years before that has been to see them happy. And so I guess both cosmoses and all the work I've done since, in a way, is my way of demonstrating, at least, how much I truly just revere and adore Carl's memory, and really believe that because I knew him so well, and I knew that it wasn't the appearance or the facade, but it was really who he was completely through himself. That I feel, I guess I want not only want to bear witness, but also because the values that we shared were so completely harmonious. And part of the greatest heartache of losing Carl is that we need a Carl right now. We need a Carl right now so badly. And, with enormous respect for so many wonderful, committed communicators of science, I feel that Carl really occupied what remains an untenanted ecological niche. The closest thing I can say to him of living people is Jane Goodall, because she not only took the science of primatology and completely brought it to a much higher level than it had ever been before, but also felt that calling of citizenship to keep that flame burning and to touch as many lives as possible.
Yeah, I think of Carl's ecumenical nature of being able to deal with people of religious nature, even though he was an atheist or he was a Democrat, I assume, but he worked with Republican administrations and scientists and so forth. I think it would be more of a challenge today, maybe, to do that, to cross that divide. We're so much more divided, it feels like now, than say in the 80s.
Yes, we are more divided, and for good reason, because, in order to be undivided, there has to be some kind of, the polarity can't be so extreme that one side falls off the edge, and that's that tension, that balance was more possible when the other side was less outrageous or less willing to take all the norms and the standards and completely trash them.
Yeah.
And so it's like that whole idea, and also in terms of climate change, the old journalistic approach of, let's hear from both sides.
Yeah.
These things became less tenable.
Right. Before we get off the whole grief thing, I want to pull back a little bit. With the rise of the nuns, a quarter of all Americans have no religious affiliation, a third of millennials, no religious affiliations, probably 40% of Gen Xers or Gen Z, iGeners. And, spirituality is on the rise in other areas, but not religion. And, humanism is, increasing and so on. What do we say to somebody who has lost somebody that they were in love with, or they themselves are dying? You don't believe in God. You don't believe in an afterlife. This is always kind of a perennial question of what we non-believers say or think, or how to sort of convey our sensibilities about this without seeming cold or mean-spirited, short of saying, hey, there's no heaven, that's it, so too bad. Obviously, we're not going to say anything like that. Give us your thoughts about, how to deal with loss, death, grief, and so on in a materialist, atheist worldview or humanist worldview or non-religious worldview, whatever we want to call it.
Well, all I can say is, even though I completely plead guilty to having been truly suicidal in the aftermath of Carl's death, uh, the thing that has comforted me and inspired me to do my work, inspired me, I hope, to be the best possible mother and daughter that I could have been, was the fact that I felt that when I was with Carl, I gave it everything I had.
Mhm.
I had no, you know, no memories to regret. I had no feeling. I mean, we were delirious about being together, and I had no resentments. I had no, all I had was this feeling that if I could only have data retrieval access to every moment that we spent together,
Mm.
think of how great that would be. I could spend that next 20 years just reliving that. And that was my only regret,
Mm.
was that I knew that as great as I remembered it, there were so many Tuesday nights, that I had forgotten. And so for me, the idea is this, is that, look, we're all going to die. That's just the way it is. And that's nature. In fact, when I think of people who are trying to live forever, I feel sorry for them
Mhm.
because I think they're missing the basic point of life and nature. So, as Emily Dickinson said, that it cannot come again is what makes life so sweet. So, if I can, dip back into my 1960s youth and say, be here now.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the comfort. Be here now. Find it the beauty in this day. Find the beauty in this enforced isolation of the coronavirus. Find find something to do. I was just thinking last night of what I consider to be one of Carl's greatest speeches, which was on the occasion of his 60th birthday at Cornell University in Bailey Hall. And this speech was a tour de force, just breathtaking. People were on the edge of their seats, pin drop silence.
Mm.
And then the questioners came up. And one of the questioners said, now that you've taken everything from us, our centrality, our status as the only children of God, the unlikelihood that this tiny world was the focus of the creator of the universe's, attention. And he went on and on, these great demotions that science has handed us, that Carl was speaking about. What do we have left? How do we find meaning? And Carl, without hesitating, looked at this man and he said, do something meaningful. And those words have echoed in my heart ever since, that inspiration of, yes, are, we live, we're like mayflies, we live for 100 years on the luckiest side of things. But we're here now, and I'm really struck by something in my daughter's book, in Sasha Sagan's book, in which she speaks about the whole history of the universe and the whole potential future of the universe. And here we are in this moment. If we could feel that, instead of always looking forward to that vacation or that something, we're here now, and we
Yeah.
have the chance to love each other now. And if we do it right, then we can come to accept the natural course of things.
Yeah. I tend to think of it like whether there's an afterlife or not is irrelevant because we don't live then and there. We live here and now. And
Right.
I think people mistake the idea of finding purpose like it's a thing you find instead of a process that you just go through.
Right. Right.
You don't get there. There's no there to get there. It's just right now. This is it. You're doing it.
That's right. That's right. Something you just said really sparked an idea, which is immediately fled. But I agree with you. Yes, it's a process, but it's also the small things that we begin to do that become, I feel like I just remember what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Yes, the most pernicious aspect of the idea of an afterlife is that it renders this life to be disposable. And that's the most wicked thing about it to me.
Yeah.
Is that here all those generations of people living their one and only lives in constant fear of the punishment that was coming for them. Like the child who's waiting for the angry father to come home and beat them up. So tragic, robbing all of the beauty of life, of its natural joy.
Yeah, I call this Alvy's error. Alvy Singer was Woody Allen's character in Annie Hall, where he has that flashback to his childhood where he refuses to do his homework because the universe is expanding. And one day it's all going to blow up. And his mother upbraids him and says, you know, what's the universe got to do with it? We live in Brooklyn and Brooklyn's not expanding. So you have to do your homework. You know, that's it. The theologian that says, well, if there's no God and there's no ultimate outside source that says this is right and that's wrong, then what difference does it make that Hitler gassed the Jews or that I beat my neighbor or whatever? What difference does it make? It makes a difference to those people then and there. And why do you need 1 billion years from now for it to matter? You know, that's what I call Alvy's error.
This was their one and only life too.
Yeah, right. I want to hit a bunch of the great topics because you're such an interesting thinker. So this is what triggered the hard problem of consciousness. You've got this image in the book of your heart rate, Andreen's brainwave, and how heart sounds recorded June 1977, right after you fell in love with Carl. June 1st, 1977, right?
Well, June 1st was the day that we had that wonderful phone call. But this recording, I think, was made on June 3rd, just 2 days later. So
right.
You can just imagine, my heart is still, I mean, it was for, it's still that way. So you can imagine it's sort of like the first 3 seconds of the origin of the universe, where it's still expanding, but how intense it must
people
have been.
People that say they don't believe in love at first sight, that's not true. Sometimes that happens right away.
It wasn't love at first sight because we had worked together for years.
Oh, okay. Right.
So it wasn't, I think some people do fall in love instantly, but I think what happens when people say that, they're talking about, that instantaneous magical attraction you have for a person. But then all of these other processes have to take place in order for it to really be love. I mean, it's attraction at first sight, and it becomes love at first sight if both people are up to it.
Yeah, you write here, might the extraterrestrials in another part of the Milky Way galaxy some 5 billion years from now be able to interpret the joy contained therein? Well, I can see that as a possibility in as much as we're already able to interpret certain brain waves as representing this pattern or that image or whatever. But the hard problem of consciousness is not that. It is the experience that you had. It doesn't matter what it looks like on a brainwave. The actual internal subjective feeling, that's the hard problem of consciousness. So I just want to get your thoughts on that. What is the explanation? Maybe there is no explanation. Maybe it's just sort of a fundamental principle of the universe that we have these subjective feelings, and I can never get inside your head to know what you feel when you feel love, and vice versa. I can't know what it's like to be a bat and so forth. But I just wanted your thoughts on the hard problem.
I don't think it's that hard a problem because I think it all has a material basis, and therefore it's knowable. And we're not able to know these things right now. But remember that when I asked Carl in 1977 if I were to meditate for an hour and have my heart, brain, everything, all of those signals recorded, would it be conceivable that the extraterrestrials could understand the message I was sending? And he said, well, 1 billion years is a long time, Annie, go do it. But, the fact is that in the time since Carl's death, only in the last 40 years, we have begun to be able to make it possible for people who are paralyzed to actually send messages with their brains, with their eyes, to a computer, and that computer can correctly interpret what their will is. Well, to me, once you can do that, you've come a long way towards decrypting. And maybe, look, if my joy what is my joy on that day? It's just a collection of molecules and atoms, but arranged in a specific way. And maybe there are, it would be possible ultimately to quantify or to apprehend what the nature of that joy is. Maybe when we are deeply, truly, madly in love, maybe our brains, make a kind of music that is able to be interpreted. I don't rule that out.
Maybe an emergent property. I mean, atoms and molecules, unless you're a panpsychist, atoms and molecules don't feel anything.
They don't feel anything, but we do, and we're made of them. So we, as we often say in Cosmos, we are a way for the universe to know itself. We're a way for those atoms and molecules to know themselves. That's, what was the famous scientist said, a physicist is an atom's way of making, someone who can understand atoms. And that's really, that's what's going on here.
Yeah. You also deal with free will. I love how you guys hit all the big questions. So, but in that chapter and in that episode of Cosmos, you tell the story after going through all of the deterministic causal vectors that, basically make bees do what they do and cockroaches all the way up to primates and us. And then you end with telling the story of Asako, who was this, crazy, mean, psychopathic, autocratic dictator, genocidal murderer, who then becomes, kind of a spiritual leader and has this total change of life. Where does the free will come in there?
Well, I don't know the answer to the free will question, so you won't get me to go out on a limb there. And so maybe Ashoka's transformation was also contained in the Big Bang, and it's just unfolding the way it was. It's possible. Obviously, I think it could be true, but it's no way to live. We have to, because of the social implications, we can't live like that. We have to imagine that even if we don't have free will, we have to live as if we do, even if that's not accurate. And so, Ashoka fascinated me because, he didn't just become a spiritual leader. He became one of the leading lights of social history, of human social organization. I mean, he is, the first instance we have of a leader who sees himself as being a means only for the public to be able to live as well as it possibly can. And so he's a complete departure from any of the other kings and leaders before him. The fact that he was a psychopathic murderer, and not just a murderer, but a sadist who used his imagination to take his sadism to new heights. The idea that's, I love the story of Ashoka because if you look at the human family as one family, then it's as if he contains the most extreme possibilities in his own life that we contain in our multitudes. And so I find him fascinating because it's also an amazing example of the unpredictability of how one person can touch another person so deeply that they're changed from a pathology to something wonderful. That's amazing. It gives me hope.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hope in the book.
Oh, totally. Well, of course, that's the whole arc of the book. But that moment when the father, I think it was, brings the dead child to Ashoka and says, "Can you bring him back to life? You have so much power," and he realizes, "No, I can't do that." The way I take that in the context of the free will determinism debate is that yes, we live in a causal universe. We're made of physical stuff, so we're caused, but we're aware of many of the causal vectors that impinge on us in a way that we can tweak them and alter our future. So I would not say the universe is determined from the Big Bang, predetermined, that we can actively engage in the causal net of the universe and tweak it a little bit and go this direction instead of that direction. And that's what I think of him doing, is like, wait a minute, I can do this instead of that. And then whatever you call it, if it's not volition, free will, or whatever, he just makes a choice. I'm going to do that instead of this. And we do have that capability. If he can do it, then hopefully almost anybody could.
Well, yeah, if he could do it, anyone could. That's true. But also, as I said before, I don't know if determinism is right or free will or super determinism. I'm just going to do the very best I can, because in the absence of knowing, what choice do we have? It's the only choice that can lead to my happiness and the happiness of others.
Yeah. Yeah, you and Carl were both pretty careful about not making a big deal about being atheists. And since then, the term has become even more polarizing, particularly since Richard's 2006 book, The God Delusion. I mean, the atheist movement kind of splintered a bit between those who were really militant and thought we should be even more militant, and those who thought we should be more conciliatory. I wonder if you and Carl were kind of strategic about that, like we don't want to offend the Christians because we need them for changing climate, solving the climate change problem or the nuclear war problem, or you just kind of genuinely felt like that. I just don't feel like being a dick about religion and atheism to people that are believers.
I don't want to be a dick about anything.
Right.
That's like my life goal. And so it wasn't a matter of manipulation or, opportunism. It was really founded in our own knowledge of how fallible, ignorant, wrong we both had been about so many things. And it also happened to be, the lucky thing was that we were both, there was no way to make Carl laugh louder than to point out or to, make a joke at his expense, because he was so comfortable with the idea of, he was really comfortable with his own fallibilities. And I am too, I mess up all the time. I could give you a list that would go on for ages. So who am I to tell someone else?
Mm-hmm.
I think there are at least two kinds of people who may not be believers, who are not believers. There are the kind who are grinding an axe, whose self-esteem is somehow bound up with the idea that I'm so much smarter than you.
Yeah.
And boy, are you dumb? And isn't it ridiculous that you get comfort from this? And there are the people who have come to a different conclusion than the believers, but who understand that, I'm just grateful to the people I knew in my life who made it possible for me to come to the conclusions I've come to. And therefore, far be it from me to cast judgment on other people's belief.
Yeah. If only more of us thought like that. Although I do have a quote from Demon Haunted World in one of my lectures. I think it was from Demon Haunted World, where Carl says something like he was talking about the skeptics movement and how easy it is to make fun of the psychics or the astrologers or whatever. And it's an easy sort of path to fall into because it feels good
Right.
to look down on those people who are not as smart as us. But the moment you turn to some other area you don't know anything about, then, well.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. In fact, I've come to a conclusion about astrology because, my son tells me, he's in his late 20s, and he tells me that there's a tremendous resurgence in astrology. And I've recently reread Daniel Defoe's Journal of the Plague Year, which has all kinds of resonance for everyone.
Yeah.
And in it, he talks about the resurgence of astrology and all what a great writer. So natural, conversational. It's like you're talking to someone from the 17th century. And And he's talking about how these astrologers and people with, all kinds of ridiculous, just quackery, completely proliferates in the atmosphere of fear. And so, that's very resonant for me. But the conclusion I've come to about astrology is, to me, it should be in the same category as racism
Mm.
and sexism, because it's saying that you can know something about who a person is and what they do and what they're like by knowing something completely trivial about them.
Hmm.
So all of a sudden, all you know is a person's birth date. Oh, it's September. You're a Virgo, and you're this, you're that, and it says likely to be wrong as racism and all of the other isms. It's just assuming by knowing one aspect of a person that you know who they are. It's a cheap way
Yeah.
of relating to other people.
I found this quote that I also use in my lecture from Demon Haunted World. Actually, have my students at my Skepticism 101 course at Chapman read Demon Haunted World. It's one of the texts. Anyway, Carl writes here. So this is 1996. I worry that pseudoscience and superstition will seem year by year more tempting. The siren song of unreason more sonorous and attractive. Where have we heard it before? Whenever our ethnic or national prejudices are aroused, in times of scarcity, during challenges to national self-esteem or nerve, when we agonize about our diminished cosmic place and purpose, or when fanaticism is bubbling up around us, then habits of thought, familiar from ages past, reach for the controls. The candle flame gutters. Its little pool of light trembles. Darkness gathers. The demons begin to stir. Man, that is great writing. I just love that.
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, that was written in this room.
It was?
It was written right where I am,
And
right at the moment.
and am I correct in understanding that you collaborated with Carl on that book as well, to a certain extent?
Well, there are phrases, that's Carl's book completely, but there are ideas and phrases and language that, it was so fun to be, for just the joy of seeing this. Imagine seeing that paragraph for the first time and being able to add a word or two.
Yeah.
And the joy of that was really amazing, and it was right here.
So nice when scientists can write that well. I think of Richard Dawkins as a beautiful writer, Steven Pinker, Steve Gould was. That's a rare gift. It's hard to write well like that.
It really is, and it's really amazing because our society, our civilization, has this artificial wall between science and culture.
Yeah.
That has cost us so terribly. And when a Stephen Jay Gould or a Carl Sagan has both parts of the civilization inside them, has internalized it to the degree where they have the scientific knowledge, the desire to communicate, and the ability to write poetry, that is an act of citizenship for the whole planet. And the fact that, I think Carl's more beloved now than he was even 25 years ago when he was alive.
He even has an amazing digital footprint online, and he died before the internet rose. So that's amazing.
Completely. He really does. And I hear from people in every country on Earth. Cosmos, the show and the book, are in 172 countries.
It's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. If you added up all 3 Cosmos series and books, how many hundreds of millions, or is it even into the billions now, have experienced it?
I think we can honestly say it's a billion people. There's some overlap, I'm sure. But yeah, I think it's a billion people. And what about doing a census to find out how many people have been attracted to write science, to teach, to do science, to study science? because of one of those? That I would love to know.
Yeah, well, you tell the story of your son Sam having a brain hemorrhage, and you take him to this doctor. I think it was at UCLA, somewhere in LA, and the doctor says not the Sagan or whatever he said. And now some people, in a different context, would find something synchronicitous about that, or Jungian, or something like that. But given Carl's reach, it can't be totally surprising that the doctor you're working with knows who Carl Sagan is, and therefore the connection there, and it feels especially motivated.
Knows who Carl Sagan was, but this doctor, he's when he realized, he made the connection between Sam, who could have died at any moment. His life, and not only his life, but his Samness was in danger because of the danger to his brain and his consciousness. And to realize that there's this one guy who can do this procedure, which is so delicate that Sam might emerge paralyzed on his left side as a good outcome. And it turns out once the doctor makes the connection, he looks at him and he goes, but that's why I'm here. If you came of age in a poor country like Colombia, as I did, and Carl Sagan called you to science, then the only avenue open to you in that country was medicine. That's why I'm standing here. Wow. That was, and then of course, as I say, not supernaturally, but naturally.
Yeah.
Sam's father reaches across time to touch that life, to save his. You see, that's my point, is that life is naturally amazing enough.
Yeah, you don't need the supernatural.
You don't need a super for it. You don't need it. If I could accomplish one thing in my life, it would be that people would start referring to the supernatural as the subnatural, because it's not above nature. It's below nature. Right. Nature is everything.
Yeah. Yeah, you also tell the story of Carl coming of age when Gerard Kuiper and Harold Urey sort of competed over him, or he was the extra son they never had, or whatever. But that's a nice story because it also shows to what extent Carl influenced the idea of planetary science, the idea that there could be extraterrestrial intelligence. This was all fringe, nutty, or just ignored stuff in the 50s. And now it's a big science, and it's talked about quite normally in conversations. Where is everybody? The Fermi paradox, and there's tons of books about this. Carl was kind of at that moment when that could have come of age, and he
was very lucky.
And helped. Yeah,
he was born at the right time. He was totally born at the right time, and the amazing thing was here was a mind that was so interdisciplinary. At a time, coming of age at a moment at the end of the period when science was so completely sectionalized to the point where there was no journal on the planet where a biologist and a geologist could collaborate on a paper. And so, it was his great good fortune to be born at that moment and to have such great teachers whom he absolutely revered, and to be able to participate in that first moment when the space sciences really are born, and when we take our first baby steps off the planet and begin to collaborate, when the disciplines, the different fields of science begin to work together. It would be unthinkable now to do a mission to another world without the collaboration of members of each of the scientific disciplines. But at that time, it wasn't happening. I love that particular chapter episode in the series because I think it tells a story I've never seen told anywhere else.
Well, it certainly shows the personal and emotional side of science. These two guys were very competitive. They weren't particularly friendly to each other.
They hated each other.
Hated each other. And Carl had to, be like the child of divorcing parents to try to keep them together for common cause. I suspect that's not that uncommon in science. I mean, it's a very very competitive enterprise. Everybody wants those prizes and the recognition and the status that comes with it. And
I think it's no more common in science than anywhere else.
yeah,
But because of the values of science, it's so unbecoming. Whereas it happens in other fields, people say, well, that's human. But the fact that it happens in science feels almost a little disgraceful because, it's that, it's the idea of being dispassionate, which is so critical to the scientific enterprise.
yeah, it's like my friend Brian Keating, the cosmologist who wrote that book about the Nobel Prize. The problem with the Nobel Prize now is these projects are so hugely collaborative, but the prize is structured that only 3 people can get it.
Yes, and I mean, even for instance, in the gravitational wave detection, I believe that there were, Kip Thorne and a number of very great scientists led it, but I believe that there were something like 2,000 co-authors
Right.
on the paper, and that's because it was like building a cathedral. It started in the 60s. It was a multi-generational undertaking, which is another great thing about science.
Yeah. So, what is your answer to the Fermi paradox? Let's just recount what that is. Where is everybody? I mean, due to the work of you and Carl and all the planetary scientists, so we now know, as you write about in Cosmos, that pretty much every star has planets. There's far more galaxies than we thought. You have that great line in there about every second. What is it? Every second, 1,000 solar systems are born. Boom,
in
boom.
the universe. Yeah.
By the way, I listened to the audio version of this book twice. Your reader is quite good, although I wish you would have read the whole thing because I got so used to your voice after the first 2 chapters. But she was great.
Denise did a fantastic job. Denise Ontiveros, she did a great job.
Yeah.
But at that time, I was having even more problems with my voice. It was so scratchy.
Okay.
And so I didn't want to irritate the reader, but I'm thrilled that you listened to it. I'm really happy to hear that.
I do a lot of audio content, especially now that we're isolated. There's not much else to do, but go ride my bike and listen to books. But back to the question. So it now looks like with the Drake equation, when you have just a couple of the variables, where pretty much every star has planets, probably at least one Earth-sized planet in the habitable zone, and so on. There's no way we can be alone. Now that doesn't prove that they're out there, but and assuming the Copernican principle that we're not special, that we're very unlikely to be the very first intelligent civilization, and assuming a bell curve, half are behind us and half are ahead of us, where is everybody?
Okay, well, this is my completely personal feeling, and that is this. We've only been able to receive radio signals for about a little over 100 years, not much. And so we could have been bombarded by radio signals up to that time, for the 4 billion years that there was life on this planet before there was the ability to detect radio signals, and we wouldn't know anything about it. And so, I think about the project's Breakthrough Starshot that I have a very peripheral role in. And this is as we show in Cosmos and in the book. This is a plan to send a flotilla of 1,000 light sails, nanocraft, very small, size of a lentil, but each one of them has more technical capabilities than the Voyager. Moreover, when they are launched, they will be moving at a significant fraction of the speed of light without breaking any physical laws. And they would overtake the Voyagers that had been traveling at roughly 40,000 miles an hour for 40 years. They will overtake them in 4 days. And the idea is to go to Proxima Centauri. Well, these nanocraft, some of them will be destroyed on the way. That's why we send 1,000. And the amazing thing is they can reconnoiter, they can do reconnaissance on a world and be burned up in the atmosphere like shooting stars. So if you were on that world, you wouldn't see anything out of the ordinary. You would think, oh, my planet passed through an old comet tail. That's what happened. And so what the point is that you earlier said something very perceptive about how we project, how we tend to project about everything. And I think that's what's happening here also, is that when we imagine the extraterrestrials are going to come here to eat us, that's a poverty of imagination, because it makes no physical sense to traverse the distances between the stars, which are so immense, if you haven't figured out how to get lunch. It just, and there is, by the time we're able to be spacefaring in the truest sense, where we can send humans to the worlds above the stars, we are not going to still be struggling with the question of hunger. I think that's not going to be an issue.
Yeah.
I think you can safely say that. So where are they? It's a very big universe. It's even a big galaxy. And it's really, I think, a failure of the imagination to say, well, this little tiny world, which is, one of an impossibly high number of worlds, hasn't been visited, or maybe it has, but not recently.
Yeah.
And that's the conclusion. It doesn't tell me, the absence of extraterrestrials sailing by does not tell me that they don't exist.
Yeah, here the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, because we haven't been looking very long. Right. It's a pretty big empty place. You make the point elsewhere in the book that, the Voyager's traveling at 38,000 miles an hour. If it were going to Proxima Centauri, which it's not, it would take 70,000 years to get there.
Exactly.
Which is Seth Shostak jokes. That's a long time to sit there with your tray table down and your seat back.
Really, it's so absolutely right. But what I think is amazing is that Sputnik is launched in 1957, the very first thing we've ever put into space. And the Voyagers are launched 20 years later, an interstellar mission. We have a great learning curve.
Yeah.
Let's apply it to the problems that we face. We are capable of greatness. Let's start using that greatness and giving it a laser focus to the problems that we face now.
Yeah. Yeah, you do talk toward the end of the book about sort of the hopeful nature of the future of our civilization, but you don't speculate much on politics and economics, like a future. Let's say we were going to colonize Mars, which we may very well do. And this is an idea I've written about because I'm curious, like, okay, what kind of government are we going to take there with us? What have we learned from the blue planet that might work on the red planet? And then in Cosmos, you go out to the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and then how to get to the nearest star. And, these are legitimate ideas. Like, we're going to become a multi-planetary species, and then a multi-stellar species, and perhaps a multi-galactic species in millions of years in the future. What have we learned here politically, economically, that you would recommend? Well, we should take this, but not that with us.
Well, I think actually the challenge of settling a place like Mars is almost a good thing, because I don't think we're ready. And I don't think we'll be ready for a while.
You mean politically ready?
Yes. I mean, our emotional and growth has not kept pace with the growth of our technology and our cleverness. And so I really don't think of us as being ready. And as Carl says in that wonderful passage that we used as the opening of the whole series, it will not be us. It will be a species more wise. Time will have changed us. I really believe that. That's why I don't get antsy about going to Mars, even though obviously, science is so precious to me, and I want to see, us become a more scientific civilization. And yet I don't think that's the answer right now. I think that part of us knows that we're too immature. As I say in the book, I was a mess in my adolescence. And so I feel I can say this with real conviction, that we are in our technological adolescence. I don't think we've recovered from the invention of agriculture yet. I don't think we've devised, why should we have? We lived as hunter-gatherers for many, many hundreds of thousands of years. And then suddenly we plop down in these cities and these settlements, and all of the ethos, the rhythm, the way that we took care of each other falls apart in that new, completely different situation. And here we are, still suffering from post-agricultural stress syndrome. And I don't want to go to Mars or take anyone to Mars until we have made peace with each other and with the environment, most of all. I mean, we don't deserve another world to do to that world what we've done to this world. We have to get our act together, clean our nest before we go off to other worlds. That's how I feel. Maybe it's a function of my age. I don't know, but I just feel like we're not ready, and we'll know when we're ready. When the dream of Vavila, that no one ever would ever be hungry. When those dreams, when we no longer are endangering our own future, then we can talk about it. There's no practical way for us to settle Mars as a solution to the problems that we created here.
Well, no, not as a solution, but as you also poetically write about in Cosmos, we are wanderers, we are travelers as a species. You have that great section on the Polynesians, casting their fate to the winds, literally, and colonizing pretty much every island. And these, some of them are thousands of miles apart. I mean, it's just amazing that we were able to do that. So I'm not saying, I think we should go to Mars because, we've fucked it up here. So the hell with Earthlings, we're going to Mars. No, I mean, just as part of our nature is to just go places new.
Yes, but we have a new way of going places, and that is we can send our robots to those places.
Right.
I am completely for that. That I endorse wholeheartedly.
Right.
But we can't escape ourselves wherever we go.
Although I should point out one of my favorite lines from Steve Pinker's new book, Enlightenment Now. This is in the section on artificial intelligence, and there's all this fear that it's an existential threat because look what our species has done, colonizing and genocidal and war and, bellicosity and so on. And he says, well, there is a species of intelligence that isn't at all like that. They're called women.
Yeah, well, I like to think that too. And although I don't, yes. I don't think it's that women are superior to men, frankly. I really don't believe that. I believe that our society is so out of whack because of the disparity in who gets to lead and who is rewarded. And I feel that if women had true equality, if we had true equality with men, that it's not like it's not as if the world would be perfect, because women are not perfect. I mean, I love women, but I have to admit we are not perfect. We're human, just like men. But if there was an equality, I think we'd have a much better society in every way. And I think it's the horrendous power that men have had over women that has damaged our society so badly. And the lack of women being able to contribute to the direction in which things go and to steering the ship has been a disaster.
Yeah. Yes, but there has been some progress, hopefully even in your lifetime, that you could see. You've told many stories of women scientists, and I think we're getting better in that area, although I guess we have a ways to go in the physical sciences, but certainly in the biological sciences, medicine, for example, in the social sciences, I think I think there's more women.
Very striking during this epidemic to see how many physicians, epidemiologists are female.
Yeah.
And it's very striking.
Yeah.
that's one of the things that gives me so much hope, Michael, is that I'm 70. And when I started out, the contempt for women was a constant struggle just to stand up, to try to finish a sentence. It was such a, hard thing to do in that environment. And I have seen enormous change, not all of the change I hope to see, but enormous change. And I find that very exciting because that's what we need.
Yeah. Some of the violence you talk about in the book, in the history of our civilization, I think instead of the way I think of it is that instead of thinking of it as a bug in our programming, it's a feature that needs to be tweaked in a way that the energy behind the violence is directed somewhere else. So just take something simple like what we're currently going through or have been, the toilet paper hoarding. And, I don't want to do it, but there's a kind of a logic to it. Like if I don't grab my share now, somebody else will, and then it'll be empty shelves. I don't want to do it. And maybe no one else wants to do it either. And now my local supermarket here in Santa Barbara, they just put up a sign, 1 package per person. And I was glad to see that. I don't want more than 1 package. And so sometimes we need some kind of centralized rule maker, lawmaker, that's the tragedy of the commons is solve the tragedy of the commons by saying, these are the rules.
Carl and I had a running conversation about Garrett Hardin and the tragedy of the commons. And it's always been my view that it should be called the tragedy of the private. The tragedy is not when all of these British farmers or shepherds, whatever they were, had a huge green grassy commons at the center of town where everyone could graze their sheep. That wasn't the tragic part. It was the selfishness. That was the tragic part. And it always really, I thought, revealed who Garrett Hardin really was and what he was really saying, is that it's like saying the tragedy of sharing as opposed to the tragedy of hoarding. That was the tragedy. And then, of course, what followed with the laws in Britain building these fences was a much bigger tragedy than the loss of the commons.
Yeah. Well, I think of, say, starting with Richard Dawkins' selfish gene model, that, I naturally want what's best for me and my family, and so do you. And I know that you do, and you know that I do, and I know that you know that I, and so forth. Therefore, there's some kind of a balance between, let's say, our inner selfishness and our outer desire to be cooperative and pro-social. Instead of seeing them as, one's wrong and the other's right, well, these are just kind of competing natural motives we have. As Dawkins says, the difference between another organism and a rock is if I kick the other, I can kick a rock, but if I kick another organism, he's going to kick back. So in other words, there's a kind of logic to not violence, but sort of cultivating a reputation. Like, I'm going to fight you back if you try to steal from me, free ride, bully me, and so on. And there are bullies, there are mean people, there are free riders, and when they try to take advantage of a social group, the group has to respond to them. So Christopher Baum has a book about this, the Moral Origins, where he has a database of how hunter-gatherers deal with free riders, bullies, psychopaths, and so on. And they start by talking to them and then isolating them, gossiping about them, and so on. Shunning, and then punishment. And then they even practice, in extreme versions, capital punishment. They'll just take the guy out for on a hunting expedition, and they come back without him. Right. So we have to have something like that in place to deal with people like that.
Well, yes, but society is a kind of, it's a template. And there's certain virtues that we reward. And then there are other traits that we try to repress. But what do you do when a society rewards only the hoarder and not the nurse and not the teacher and not the firefighter and not the people that we need the most? What do you do in that situation? What do you do in a situation where nobody knows who a guy like Vavilov was, or Kondratyeva, the discoverer of the gravitational assist, or so many, Victor Goldschmidt, the genius geochemist. What do you do in a society where nobody knows their name, but everybody knows the name of an influencer who's known entirely for their consumption, for what they consume, for what they wear, for where they go? What do you do in that situation? I mean, that's where the problem.
Stay offline. Quit watching YouTube.
No, that's where the problem begins.
I know.
Is that, you can't blame YouTube.
Yeah,
it's just a reflection of reality.
Right.
It's just a reflection of who we are. It's who we are that is the problem.
Yeah.
That we, I'm looking at these public health workers and feeling like, I don't understand how this can't lead to some kind of revolution in the way, in who we value, who we reward, who we pay. May that be the outcome of this nightmare, that we reward people who contribute nothing to the quality of life. And then we abuse the people who do. It's wrong. It's selectively, it's disadvantageous, purely in an evolutionary sense. If no one's ever heard the name of a single engineer.
Yeah.
Who's living today. Tell me the name of one engineer. But how many, influencers can I name?
Yeah.
Dozens.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah, it does seem pretty screwy, to be sure. Although, as a person who looks at history, you have to be encouraged by the social norms that have changed over the centuries of how we think about, say, Jews, blacks, and women. Dawkins makes this point. You can pinpoint a novel down to about the decade when it was written, based on the language and words that are used to describe.
It's true.
Yeah. And it's not clear to me how that happens. It's kind of from the bottom up. There's no language police saying, we're going to arrest you if you use the N-word or whatever. We just all stopped doing it because the oppressed groups themselves stood up and said, quit using that word, quit calling me that, quit referring to me that way. And maybe it takes a while on a human scale. A decade seems like a long time, but in the bigger picture, that actually came about pretty quickly. Think of the gay rights movement, how quickly that changed from, say, 2011, when both Hillary and Obama were against gay marriage.
Yes.
At least they said so publicly. Who knows what was in their hearts? But and then 2015, the Supreme Court decision, and now we almost quit talking about it. It's like a Seinfeld episode, whatever, dude, it's okay. I don't care. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
That makes you a bad person. Yeah. No, it's really, it's one of the things that gives me a sense of human self-esteem, that we have been able to do this. But the thing is that it's a pendulum too, though. Like in Weimar, Germany, there were moments when this kind of acceptance actually happened. And, when the pendulum went swinging back in the other direction, it was even more horrifying than it had been before. So it's something we have to hold on to and cherish and instill in future generations, of how everyone has to grasp how important it is that we continue in that direction.
Yeah. I tend to be fairly optimistic, although I think it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back on the moral arc.
Right.
And, well, I also wanted to ask you about this. Of course, that's, and you're standing in front of a big version of it for your author photo. So this was an illustration when Carl was, 9 or something like that?
Something like 9 or 10.
Yeah. So where is the original of this?
It's in the Library of Congress. Used to be here in my house, and it's now in the Library of Congress. And I love that drawing so deeply. First of all, because you can see this kid, in this Brooklyn apartment, tiny. I was in that apartment. It was modest, tiny. And His dad is a cutter in the garment industry. His mother doesn't work. They're paycheck to paycheck. They've never met a scientist. And yet, here's this kid dreaming of interstellar flight and seeing the unfolding on the mastheads of the newspapers of the time of our great leaps forward into the cosmos. Now, it's wonderful because of his imagination and because of the goals that he set for us at age 9, and for the tracing and the idea that it's an enlistment poster for an interstellar fleet. And by the way, women can join also. He mentions that at the bottom. So, that's wonderful. But then the idea that this 9-year-old gets to be a central player in the very first interstellar missions. That's the wonder of life.
Yeah.
That gives me so much hope. And, I've imagined who the equivalent Carl Sagan is, lying on a tatty rug somewhere, some crummy apartment, and what their dreams are. And, I hope they come true.
Well, you end the series and the book with that imagination of a young girl writing her own little headlines in 2040 and 2060 and 2070 and so on. The things we will have accomplished. Very ambitious of you to think like that, because who knows? We don't know. But I to me, but that's part of art, is projecting the way things ought to be, not just the way they are, which is what science does.
Yes, and in Carl's case, his was called The Evolution of Interstellar Flight, and this young girl, I imagine, she is doing her poster is How the Earth Got Well. And each milestone each headline is a step in that direction, because more than anything else we have to do, that's the prize. That's the prize we should keep our eye on. We have to set things right with our environment.
Yeah, well, you tell that story of the CFCs and how even though corporations didn't want to do something about it, they did, because social pressure and political pressure eventually and so on. And we pretty much solved that problem. Although I think you had a date of like 2050 before all the CFCs are gone, something like that.
Right. But in terms of its impact on us and its damage to us, we have solved that problem. Right.
But the climate change problem is probably orders of magnitude larger than the CFC problem.
Yes, because that was just one industry. But now, during this pandemic, I want to know how, I was trying to track this down. So how many fewer greenhouse gases are we lofting into the atmosphere with our airline industry quiescent, with the many factories still, with nobody driving? Somewhere I saw that it was 30%, but I don't know if that's right.
Well, there's those pollution maps of China, which are just stark. I mean, it's just amazing how different it is.
How different it is. So let's go with this. I like this. I would love to be able to hold my loved ones in my arms. But apart from that, I mean, is this the beginning of something? Look at how, obviously it's a great economic cost, but we are living without things that we thought we couldn't live without.
Right. Yes, I have a feeling this is going to be a major game changer for our generation and for generations to come. It could be a lot more stuff is done remotely. Education, media, interviews like this. People are kind of figuring out how to set up their house and the camera and where does the light go. And, no one really thought about any of that. And it's fine. I'm fine watching the news and these talk shows with the guests not being there in the studio. Who cares where they are?
You don't need them. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, Anna, I want to be mindful of your time. We've been going an hour and a half, but I want to get your thoughts on what's your next big project. How do you top 3 cosmos? A 4th cosmos?
Cosmos 4, yeah. Sorry, losing my voice. I have a 4th cosmos in mind. and we'll see what happens. But I do have a sense of each cosmos has a kind of thematic. Even though the episodes are very different from each other, there's some kind of theme running through all of them. And Sam Sagan and I I came up with an idea, and Sam made it that much better. And so I'm hoping I've been saving stories, things I encounter in books and journals and everywhere. And we'll see what happens. I hope to be able to do another one. I think I have another one in me and some other ideas and other projects I'm excited about.
I hope you do. How much does it cost to produce a 13-part series like Cosmos? I mean, I have no idea.
It's very expensive, and I think I'm not supposed to divulge that.
Oh, okay. It doesn't matter. That's all right. It's okay.
I don't know. But what I'd rather say is that Fox and National Geographic in both season 2 and season 3 have been the most generous partners in giving me the money that I thought was necessary in order to have the production values, the visual effects that are so magnificent, and the time, and the 987 people, we counted them,
wow,
who worked on this show in about a dozen countries. Wow. So rather than divulge how much it cost, I don't know if they care about this, but what the hell? Just to say that it was a struggle for years before season 2 to find a network that would give me the creative control and the wherewithal to make this show. And if it wasn't for Seth MacFarlane, it never would have happened.
Yeah.
And so I'm deeply thankful to my dear friend Seth.
Yeah, he's a great guy. He's become a friend of sorts. He was a fan of my book, The Moral Arc, and we want to produce a series like that, not quite like Cosmos, but something different. But sometimes it takes just someone like him who has the connections and the power with the media to do something. And
absolutely.
And to their credit, I think although they wouldn't have done it a second time had it not been a market success, that is, people watched, and right. they have to have that because it's a business. So right. That's encouraging that millions of people want this content.
Yes, and the more people who see it, the more want it, and so it's tremendously encouraging and exciting.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. I can't wait to see that. I guess it's about 3 or 4 years to bring this online. Yeah, it's
right.
Quite a project. It takes me 3 years to research, write, and produce a book. So add a TV series to that. It's probably 5 years.
Yeah. No, but Michael, what a joy it's been to reconnect. I really enjoyed our conversation. It was wonderful.